The Pokemon Scarlet and Violet leak saga has been going on for nearly 2 weeks, and it seems as though both of our insiders have decided to step down. Let's take a look at all the leaks we've gotten so far for the upcoming Pokemon games. This goes without saying, but there is a massive spoiler warning in this video. Some of the information here is obviously unconfirmed by Pokemon, but it did come from the leaking source, which does seemingly have a beta version of the game. Things are obviously subject to change, but I think at this point we can pretty much take all this information as relatively true or true. The region in Japan is called Paldea or Paldea, so look for the English translation to be something similar to that. There are 3 cities and 9 towns in the main structure of the game, and I'm gonna kind of paraphrase some of this stuff too. The leaker has indicated that it's basically the size of the entirety of Pokemon Legends Arceus and then some, all in one map essentially. The gyms can be done in any order, but at this point in the beta, there is no level scaling. I really sincerely hope that changes. It's great that we have the opportunity to challenge any of the gyms in any order we want, but if the gyms don't change to reflect our party or how many badges we have at the very least, I think that's gonna be a massive fail from Pokemon. The gym types are apparently electric, water, grass, ice, bug, ghost, psychic, and normal. However, I don't think they're in that order because I'm pretty sure Psyche is the 8th one. Gyms apparently do have a rematch feature, and the gym leaders generally all have secondary jobs, much like we saw in Pokemon Black and White, and some other Pokemon games where they kind of give the gym leaders a little bit more personality. They have some other role, whether they're like a photographer like Viola and her sister, or they're, I don't know, whatever they do. But apparently in this game, one of them is a streamer, that's like me. One of them is a snowboarder or an athlete, and then apparently Riddler Koo said that the Ghost Gym Leader is actually a rapper, so we'll have to see if that all plays out. The idea and thought that this game does revolve around some sort of a school system is actually apparently true. There's classes, interviews, and exams in the game, probably relating to Pokemon. You have to clear 3 different routes or quests in order to see the ending, so you don't just get the ending by beating all the gyms in the Elite Four. Apparently there's 3 different paths you have to take to ultimately get to the proper ending. Our rival slash friend is a girl with red slash blue hair, while the other is Nemona. There's also another rival that hasn't been revealed at this point. In terms of the professors, one of the professors, Seda, only appears in Scarlet, and Turo only appears in Violet. They're not evil professors. Apparently there's not a ton of clothing options, but there's a lot of hats, glasses, face, and hair options, and all of the clothing options are actually relating to school clothing. I hope that's not the case. Maybe that's the case of the beta situation, but I could also see it being the case. So as someone, I'm sure many of us like the customizable, trainer outfits. It seems like they're gonna be relatively limited to school clothing. The Elite Four has no type overlap with the gyms, nor do they use new types never seen in the Elite Four. So we've never had an Elite Four member for normal, grass, electric, or fairy. One of them is a child, apparently. So what this is saying is that the Elite Four doesn't overlap with the gyms, and the Elite Four is not types we've never seen before. Process of elimination only gives you a few different types left, like Dragon is obviously one of them. Steel is another one, so I would say that those are some of the ones that we might see the Elite Four. Apparently the champion is male or female, depending on the version. I wonder if that has something to do with the professor, but it just said that the professors are only in one game, they're not in both. So I'm not really sure what the deal with that is, so I don't really have a ton of information on that. Apparently fishing is not returning and there's no bikes, but obviously the legendary Pokemon Koraidon and Miraidon are Pokemon that you can ride on, so I think that's going to take the place of the travel system. There's apparently a new auction system with NPCs where you can get various items, one of which is like the different Rotom items to change Rotom's form. And from both of our leakers, there's information that there's going to be a DLC for this game, but there's really nothing about it outside of the fact that there are plans for a DLC, which is really not that surprising considering that was their entire strategy for Sword and Shield, Isle of Armor, Crown Tundra. Makes a lot of sense for them to approach this game the exact same way, as opposed to releasing third versions of games. They probably profit more off of the DLC, and they keep the franchise kind of building that way. One of the biggest changes seems as though there's no more daycares or breeding Pokemon, but apparently you can still get eggs through a feature called Picnics. We don't really know much about the Picnics, but there's something that replaces Pokemon Camp. You can wash your Pokemon and do different things with these Picnics, and apparently that's how we're gonna get eggs. There may be other methods, but it seems as though the traditional system of breeding Pokemon may not actually be in Scarlet and Violet. There's no move reminder, but the way to teach moves to Pokemon again is the same way as Legends Arceus, which is actually a big win in my opinion. And much like Legends Arceus as well, you can choose when to evolve your Pokemon in the menu. Apparently raid battles are actually returning and they're multiplayer as well. Huge wins. I don't really know how that works if you can't Dynamax, but the idea of being able to still go into raids with people was probably one of the better features that Sword and Shield actually launched with. It got stale eventually, but it was really fun at the beginning. Mass outbreaks from Legends Arceus are also returning as probably a potential shiny hunting method, and apparently the experience share cannot be turned off. Now it's time to talk about some of the different Pokemon and the different Pokemon forms that we're gonna see in this game. Speaking of Pokemon forms, if you like shiny Pokemon, you should check out my merch store at teamshiny.com. I have all sorts of awesome tees like this awesome shiny Charizard tee there, including the starter Pokemon for the region and many, many more. So check out teamshiny.com and see if there's any merch that you want to pick up. We've got a ton of amazing designs, and you can use code SUMMER to save 15% off if you pick up 3 t-shirts or more. So the regional Pokedex apparently has 400 plus Pokemon, and there's a new bonding subquest that Eevee fans will enjoy, but as of what we've seen now, there is no indication that there's a new evolution. I mentioned that the Rotom forms can be obtained via auctions, and there's no previous generation starters are in the game. But one Riddler says otherwise, so we'll have to wait and see if, you know, your Charmanders and Squirtles and stuff are gonna ultimately be in the game. Regardless, I think they would be added through DLC later on. Not all Hisuian forms are in the game, but we know that many are, like Hisuian Zoroark. Alpha Pokemon return in some form, but apparently they're called and treated as something different. And Pokemon size differences return as well, which makes a lot of sense given that we have Pokemon in the overworld, so I'm excited to see that return. This is confirming that overworld shinies are returning. I personally didn't see the source for that, but I'm gonna just trust it since it seems like this is just kind of a amalgamation of all the information from the Riddlers. But again, take all this with a grain of salt. I can see them putting overworld shinies in again though. They did it in Legends Arceus. I think it makes a lot of sense in the context of this open world game. You can apparently control the camera in battle, much like in Legends Arceus, but the catching mechanics are similar to previous Pokemon games, not like Legends Arceus. There's apparently an NPC that trades you one Pokemon from a previous game, and there's no rideable Pokemon other than Koraidon and Miraidon. Following Pokemon do exist, but they can only follow you outdoors, that's fine with me. Now there's apparently 100 plus new Pokemon, 120 to 140 when counting the form changes and potential DLC Pokemon. The starter theme for the various starters, Sprigatito is a magician, Quaxly is a dancer, and Fuecoco is a singer. Sprigatito's evolution did leak, but apparently it's so-so in terms of cuteness. It's themed around masks, clowns, and gentleman thieves. It's bipedal as soon as its second stage. Fuecoco's second evolution is still bipedal when it evolves, and it has an egg on its head that looks kind of like a hat. Its final evolution looks similar to an alligator, so it falls on all fours, and it has a flaming chicken on its head. It becomes quadruped. Signature move has something to do with singing. Quaxly's second evolution is themed around peacocks and dancers. It's bipedal the entire way. We do have various information to confirm the evolution typings for these starters, that Fuecoco is going to be fire and ghost typing. We have Sprigatito being grass and dark typing, and Quaxly's final evolution being water and fighting typing. Apparently there's no new fossil Pokemon, and also there's no third legendary, which would be pretty new to the franchise. There's a new dolphin Pokemon, and there's something special about it. A new spider Pokemon line that was teased in the first trailer that we actually have this image for. There's apparently a new earthworm Pokemon that's red color that does not evolve, as well as a new dung beetle Pokemon that's bug, and we don't know what else, but it does evolve once. A common rider themed bug that's not bug and fighting. Looks like there's gonna be a lot of bug types. There's a new ghost type dog Pokemon, a new unspecified dog Pokemon line, and then another new unspecified dog Pokemon line. We basically just got information that there was a ghost dog, and then there was 3 dog Pokemon total. There was a lot of talks about a new coin Pokemon. That seems to still be the case, but it evolves into like a gold humanoid. And there's a new salt Pokemon that evolves, a new engine line that evolves once, a new flower Pokemon, a new icicle or glacier Pokemon line, that's an ice type, a new ostrich Pokemon that has hair like Cleopatra, that's a psychic type, a new flamingo Pokemon, which we saw images of, that's apparently fighting and flying, much like Hawlucha. It does not evolve. There's a new parakeet Pokemon that does not evolve as well, a grass and fire type Pokemon, which may tie into something I'm about to talk about. There's a new fish Pokemon, very vague, a new bike Pokemon, unsure about that one, another new bird Pokemon, which could be a regional bird. There's a chili pepper Pokemon apparently, which could be the fire grass Pokemon that people have speculated this entire time. Those are 2 different pieces of information, that there was a chili pepper emoji describing a Pokemon and a fire and grass Pokemon. Are they the same thing? I don't know, but I think that's very likely. There's apparently a new frog Pokemon that evolves and a new fire Pokemon with 2 evolutions. There's also a new notable fire type Pokemon that's not the starter that actually happened to be the favorite of one of the leakers. There's a new small feminine pink Pokemon that uses a hammer, and it's actually one of the Elite Four aces. It's apparently fairy type but has a second type, and since we know that fairy is actually one of the types that was discussed previously, apparently that's not going to be an Elite Four type. So whatever its secondary typing is probably what the Elite Four aces type is. It either evolves or it's the evolution of another Pokemon. It's probably the evolution of another Pokemon, because if that's the one the Elite Four uses, why would they not use the fully evolved Pokemon? We know that Lechonk does evolve, and it has the same Pokemon evolution, but there's gender differences. Much like some Pokemon have, different appearances when they evolve, like Pyroar is a great example. That's going to be kind of the gist with Lechonk. Palmy is apparently based on a groundhog, and it actually is a two-stage or three-stage Pokemon rather, where it evolves twice, and it has a special move that has only 1 PP that can actually revive a Pokemon, which could be massively game-changing for the competitive Pokemon landscape. Smoliv evolves into a feminine Pokemon and then an olive tree-themed one. It's a 3-stage line. As speculated, Koraidon and Miraidon can be ridden. They're quite fast. They climb, swim, and fly, but they don't apparently turn into motorcycles. You can't battle with those two Pokemon until the very end of the game, but you can apparently catch and battle Pokemon while riding Koraidon and Miraidon. So how you actually get them at the beginning of the game is going to be determined, but apparently you don't get to use them until at the very end. There is a new group of 4 legendary Pokemon. Think like Tapus, Swords of Justice, etc., and they apparently all have Chinese names, but that obviously could change. Now looking at some of the regional forms and new forms we're going to see of these potential Paradox forms, we have Wooper getting a new regular regional form. It's apparently a poison type and will evolve. Tauros also gets a regional form that actually has 3 different versions, and its type depends on the area on the island, much like Oricorio is a great example. One is black and a fighting type, and the other 2 are dual typing. Wooper and its evolution, as well as Tauros, are really the only 2 regional forms in the game. There's some cross-generation evolutions, like Primeape getting a new evolution with an interesting method to evolve, becoming fighting and ghost type. Previously rumored, Murkrow apparently does not have evolution, but Girafarig does, and that image is leaked. Dunsparce also has an evolution that doesn't fly, and it's also pure normal type apparently. It looks similar, but it's just bigger. And then we believe that Bisharp has some sort of important evolution that may be related to a rook or a queen, because obviously Bisharp is related to the chessboard. Now shifting gears, we have the Paradox forms, which are kind of the ancient or future forms of various Pokemon. They kind of group into a new category of Pokemon like Ultra Beasts with different names. They're ancient and future forms. They don't evolve, but apparently they're very strong in battle. There's about 8 or 9 ancient forms and probably about 8 or 9 future ones as well. Some of them have shared abilities, like the Ultra Beasts have Beast Boost. There'll be 2 Pokemon that get ancient and future forms, Volcarona and a Pokemon from Generation 2. The naming scheme is speculated to be something like Iron/Pokemon name for future forms, and we're really not sure how the naming is going to be, but right now they are called Paradox forms. Apparently the legendaries may get Paradox forms during the DLC, and Riddler Coup has seen the designs, but again, a little unsure there. Unspecified Cactus Pokemon may get a form, which could be Maractus Cacturne, or maybe it could be a Cactus Sudowoodo, which was something that was heavily rumored at. Apparently these Paradox forms do not change types from their counterparts, so like the Paradox Jigglypuff stays normal and very much like a regular Jigglypuff would. And there's no limit to how many you can get. Apparently in the post-game, there's an area where you can obtain these things relatively easily. In terms of ancient Paradox forms, we have Jigglypuff, Amoonguss, both of which we've seen images of, Mischievous, Volcarona, and then an unspecified pseudo-legendary, which is speculated to be Tyranitar, as well as a Generation 2 Pokemon, which has a counterpart future form, which we don't know yet. In terms of future forms, we have Delibird. We also have Gallade. So the thought is that Gallade is going to look similar to Gardevoir and Gallade. Hariyama, apparently. Volcarona, which loses its bug typing, apparently. And then an unspecified pseudo-legendary, which a lot of people are speculating could be Salamence, and then the Generation 2 Pokemon, which has both an ancient and a future form. Then there's another subset of these various ideas called regional fakes or convergent Pokemon. This is apparently a new concept, which is basically regional variants with new names and dex numbers. They're not the same Pokemon, but they look like Pokemon we already know. They're not ancient and future forms or Paradox forms. These Pokemon can evolve. One example of this is a water Pokemon that looks like a geyser in Diglett's face. It's pink and like an eel. Will have an evolution similar to Dugtrio. Another one is a fake of Generation 1 Pokemon that crawls from the sea to the land. Some people are thinking it could be Krabby, Seal, Lapras, maybe even something like Horsey. And last but not least, we have the gimmick of Pokemon in terms of what the main kind of thought is going to be. That it comes from a special ball that Nemona gives you that can be used once per battle. The Pokemon gets a crystal aura and additional flourish, like a skull in the flower Pokemon, which is something that we've actually had leaked already, which might represent poison type. Pokemon in this form have a single type boosted, but it doesn't actually change their types, it just changes the type of that attack. The example is a normal type using the gimmick increases the strength of tackle on Pikachu, even though it's an electric type. It can be used on all Pokemon, but it reverts when they're called back or knocked out. A huge shout out to DS Dark for compiling this information on Reddit and making it really easy for the community to kind of summarize all the information that has taken place from the 2 different leakers, Riddler Coup and Kaka. I think even though this may be the last of the leaks we see for a while, I'm still banking on a trailer sooner than later, and I think that there's still plenty of stuff for us to talk about and break down for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Don't forget to check out my store at teamshiny.com if you want to pick up some sweet merch, and use code SUMMER to get 15% off if you pick up 3 t-shirts or more. Let me know what your thoughts on all these leaks. Is there something that jumps out to you that has you really excited, or maybe not so much so? Obviously, things are subject to change, but it's pretty crazy that we got all this information, and we still haven't even had our 3rd trailer. That's gonna be it for me, guys. My name is Dan. I also go by A-Drive, and I will see you guys on the next one. Peace.